Racist. Karen calls 911 on my wife for filling up her gas. She orders her to pay for her gas. She had just finished pumping gas and was accused of stealing because she's a black woman. If that sentence gives you chills, then watch this video to the end, because sometimes a simple everyday act can ignite an entire storm of prejudice. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever stood in real life and felt like your brain was buffering? Not because of slow Wi-Fi, but because the world around you suddenly behaved like a tragic comedy. Too absurd to believe it's real. That morning, Beavis Bellingham, a contract attorney living in the quiet suburb of Willow Heights, stood frozen in front of the Elm and Grove gas station at exactly 11:42 a.m., all because of something seemingly trivial. My wife was filling up the car. Myra, my wife, is a black elementary school teacher, known for being the kindest soul you could ever meet. She brews coffee for the mailman, stops her car for mother ducks leading ducklings across the road, and still waves to bus drivers like it's 1960. But she became a target of public hostility in broad daylight, simply because one woman couldn't tolerate sharing public space with someone different. A shrill bark erupted from a chipped beige station wagon, followed by the piercing screech of Kara, real name Ellie Whitmore, our neighbor of 5 years. A woman who looked like she had stepped out of a 1950s campaign flyer, dry bleached hair, a faded floral dress, orthopedic sandals, and a gaze so cold you'd think the whole world had wronged her. At that moment, Myra still had the pump nozzle in her car. Her hand rested on the fuel cap, her expression confused, as Kara shouted, "You're stealing my gas. I saw it. You people are always doing this. You people." That phrase rang through my head like an air raid siren, because in this neighborhood, we knew exactly what that meant. It wasn't the first time Kara spoke like this, from complaining that our wind chimes sound like jungle music, to writing a letter saying our Christmas lights were too loud and lacked elegance. She always found ways to remind us that, to her, we didn't belong. Willow Heights is a quiet residential area, 92% white, where people walk their dogs, host weekend barbecues, and pretend not to see what makes them uncomfortable. And for Kara, that discomfort was Myra, a black woman living too peacefully next door. The wind chimes, the Christmas lights, the mailbox that was too modern, we let all that slide. But that morning, at the gas station, when Myra was simply pumping gas, correct pump, correct process, correct vehicle, she was dragged into an accusation so absurd it bordered on offensive parody. I had only meant to swing by and get her favorite detox water, the cucumber lemon flavor she sips after teaching. But instead, I found my wife being screamed at by a woman trying to turn a gas station into a courtroom of racial bias. Kara kept yelling while her dog, Duchess, barked madly in the back seat. Myra stood still, silent, not understanding how she had become the target of such fury. What chilled me wasn't Kara's voice, it was the eyes around us. The man in the blue button-down at pump number 4 tapped his phone like nothing was happening. The young woman across the lot turned her back and pretended to adjust her rearview mirror. No one spoke. No one intervened. There was only the terrifying silence, the kind bred by long-standing tolerance of injustice. And that's when I stepped out of the car. Just 8 words. But the weight they carried was enough to drag an entire history of discrimination into the present. Right there at a gas station, in broad daylight, in a neighborhood that still proudly called itself civilized. I pulled up behind the ice cooler next to a sun-faded Pepsi vending machine, deliberately keeping some distance so I could observe. The instincts of a lawyer wouldn't let me rush in. I needed to see, hear, and fully understand. Myra, in her turquoise cotton dress, hair tied in a neat bun, didn't move reflexively to defend herself. She stood upright, her eyes still trying to process what was happening. The nozzle was still tucked inside the fuel tank, the machine displaying $43.29, locked in just under 30 seconds ago. Kara, or rather, Ellie Whitmore, had morphed into a twisted cartoon version of herself. Mouth wide open, eyes bulging, finger pointing, foot stomping. Her voice pitched so high it sent a flock of sparrows scattering from the nearby lamppost. And then, she said it. "You people." No one in this neighborhood was unfamiliar with that phrase. It wasn't a mere generalization. It was coded language for contempt, wrapped in the thin disguise of public concern. It's how those with deep-seated racial resentment try to legalize their hostility. Before I could even leave the driver's seat, she lunged forward and grabbed my wife's wrist. It wasn't a "please wait" or "let's talk." It was a yank, loaded with all the pent-up psychological violence she had been harboring for years. Myra flinched, pulled her arm back, but didn't cry out. She never learned how to fight back, because from a young age she was taught, stand still, or they'll fear you. But I couldn't stand still any longer. I opened the car door and shut it firmly, just loud enough to send a signal. No tie. No adjusting my hair. No smile. Just the presence of a husband, a man, someone who knew the law and was ready to wield it. "Kara, that's enough." My voice cracked like a gavel in court. She spun around. Her gaze shifted from arrogance to rage, then to surprise, before snapping back into attack mode. "Beavis Bellingham," she growled, "stay out of this. Your wife is a thief. I saw everything." I stepped in, positioning myself between her and Myra. "My wife paid for her gas in front of everyone. The receipt is right here. The camera is overhead. The station attendant is 15 meters away. But what about you? You just laid hands on someone without permission, and now you're about to lie to the police." Kara, undaunted, pulled out an ancient 2003 Samsung flip phone, complete with oversized physical buttons, and started dialing. "I'm calling 911, she shrieked. "She assaulted me. She touched my car. She's trying to damage my vehicle." I inhaled deeply, keeping my composure. But inside, I knew. The performance had begun. And without the law, without reason, it could easily end with police sirens and an innocent woman in handcuffs. The phrase, "you people," had lit the fuse. The 911 call was the spark, and I was ready to extinguish that fire with the truth. Kara's silver gray 2003 flip phone wasn't just a communication device. In her hands, it was a stage prop. And when she dialed 911, I knew for certain the curtain had officially risen on a racist performance. "She touched me!" Kara screamed, her eyes darting around as if searching for an audience. "She pumped gas into my car! She's trying to destroy my vehicle!" No evidence. Not a single act occurred the way she described. But that voice, shrill, trembling, dripping with emotion, was crafted to strike at the deepest fears of those unwilling to confront the truth. I raised my hand, not to intervene, not to interrupt, but firmly and clearly. "You're fabricating this. This is a false report. If you continue, you're stepping into the territory of criminal offense." Kara glared at me, took a step forward, her eyes filled with a fury meant to shred through logic. "I'm a respected voice in this community," she hissed, "and I'm a lawyer, and I'm standing right here. The police will know exactly who's lying." And they arrived. 4 minutes after the call, 2 patrol cars swept into the lot like a windstorm, white and blue Ford Explorers, license plates 91 CDX 3025 and 90J 8791, their red and blue lights spinning across the pavement. Sirens blared, heads turned, phones were pulled out. An all too familiar scene in modern America, where a false call can so easily spiral into real tragedy. 4 officers stepped out, 3 men, 1 woman, hands near their holsters, eyes scanning each of us. We received a report of vandalism and assault, one of them called out. Immediately, we were separated. I, Myra, and Kara, each escorted to different corners of the lot, about 10 meters apart. A police body camera was switched on, clipped to a uniform shoulder. I noticed that instantly. Everything would be recorded. Myra, though her hands trembled slightly, remained composed. She unlocked her phone, opened the payment app, and showed the digital receipt. Pump number 3, $43.29, timestamp 11:44 a.m. All information is visible. Payment code, transaction ID, and even a still image pulled from the app's internal camera feed. I asked the officers to check the gas station security footage, but before they could, Tyler, the young gas station attendant, barely 20, round glasses and a light blue button-up, stepped out from behind the counter. "I saw everything," he said firmly. "She, Myra, came in, paid inside, and then went to pump her gas. She didn't touch anyone's car, didn't argue, until that woman started yelling." At that moment, one of the officers interviewing Kara could be heard faintly in the distance. At first, she claimed someone was stealing gas. Then she said she was assaulted. Now, she's talking about someone hacking her gas sensor. I exhaled quietly. Kara's script was beginning to unravel itself. One of the officers, Lane, about 6 feet 1 inch, white, slow stride but sharp eyes, approached me. "You said you're an attorney?" "Yes, Bevis Bellingham." I pulled out my bar card from my jacket's inner pocket. He glanced at it, then nodded. "Good, because she's exhausting us." And in that moment, I knew the balance had begun to tip toward the truth. But the fight wasn't over. Kara wasn't the kind of person to surrender her right to scream at the air. And 9/11 had only been the opening act for what she wanted, a public indictment of people like my wife. After the police separated the 3 of us, I stood about 12 steps away from Myra, close enough to see her bow her head for the 3rd time, open her phone, and check the receipt again. Her left hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the shame of being publicly accused in front of strangers, for nothing more than the color of her skin. The receipt was still clearly displayed. Elm and Grove Gas Station, pump number 3, $43.29, transaction completed at 11:44 and 12 a.m. A silent yet powerful line. It spoke on my wife's behalf, that she was honest, law-abiding, and had done nothing wrong. But the truth, as I've come to know well after 11 years in law, always needs supporting evidence. I stood next to Officer Lane, who seemed to have seen enough of these petty manipulations, and began explaining. "My wife came here to get gas. She paid at the counter, received her receipt, and walked out to the car. There was no vandalism, no contact with anyone else's vehicle. You can check the cameras, confirm with the station attendant." I spoke slowly, clearly, each word like a gavel hitting courtroom wood. Lane listened, nodded slightly, didn't write, but I knew he was recording every detail mentally. A few meters away, Kara was in the middle of a performance fit for cable news. Her voice trembled, then snapped. Her tears were half fake, half calculated. She claimed to be so terrified I can't remember everything, yet somehow recalled in vivid detail how Myra gave her a suspicious look and made strange gestures around the gas station. A female officer asked, "Did you see her pump gas into your car?" Without blinking, Kara replied, "I didn't need to see. I felt it." Just then, the department's technician finished checking the station's camera system. 2 minutes later, one of the officers returned and spoke to Lane, loud enough for me to hear, It's clear. The black woman went inside, paid, didn't touch anyone's car. The other one, Kara, stepped out, approached, and grabbed the accused's arm. Not only had Myra done nothing wrong, Kara was the one who committed the physical violation. I stepped forward. I request a formal report for unlawful physical contact and false reporting to public authorities. That's prosecutable under Section 18.2-461 of the Virginia Criminal Code. Lane turned toward me, but didn't respond right away. He looked at Kara, who had now shifted tone, whispering to the female officer. She, Myra, looked threatening. I was robbed in 2004. Maybe I'm just traumatized. When there's no excuse left, the bigot leans on personal fear to justify systemic insult. Lane sighed, as if this type of investigation was all too familiar. He tucked his notebook into his chest pocket, turned back to me, and said quietly, almost a breath, "We'll file a full report. But I think you already know. What comes next?" I nodded. No clarification needed. What comes next isn't waiting for a courtroom verdict. It's an action, grounded in law, anchored in dignity, and backed by the truth. On the drive home, Myra sat in the passenger seat. She didn't cry. She wasn't angry. She just stared quietly out the window, where a passing freight truck kicked up dust that blurred the pavement ahead. After a few minutes of silence, she turned to me, eyes still forward. I was just standing there, just being myself. And somehow, that's enough to be hated. That sentence even now chills me to the bone, because in this society, to some people, the very existence of a kind, law-abiding black person is an unforgivable offense. That evening, after bringing Myra home and watching her quietly remove the small silver clip from her softly curled hair, I knew this couldn't end at the gas station. It couldn't end with a vague police report. It couldn't be just a frustrated social media post or a dinner table story. So at 10:17 p.m., I sat down at my desk, turned on the printer, and placed a sheet of Crane and Company's creamy white cotton paper, the kind I reserved only for the most serious legal matters. And I began drafting the first formal legal demand letter of my life to defend my wife. The contents were clear, with 3 specific demands: a written apology, signed and delivered within 7 days, a no-contact order, both direct and indirect, within a 50-meter radius of my wife's home or workplace, and emotional distress damages, $5,000, by civil liability provisions for defamation and public insult. I sent the letter through 3 channels simultaneously: a tracked email with open receipt verification, a signed delivery via express courier, and a hand-delivered copy I placed in Ellie Whitmore's mailbox. Address 314 Brookstone Lane, the place she still referred to as a Southern Heritage Estate. 3 days later, at 9:46 a.m., I received a response, a handwritten 2-page letter, written in purple ink on scented pink stationery. The penmanship was elaborate, ornate, reminiscent of pre-war love letters. But the content was anything but tender. The opening line read, "I am the victim here." In her letter, Kara, Ellie accused me of using legal knowledge to intimidate an elderly woman. She claimed, "Your family represents a potential threat to the safety and cohesion of this upscale residential community," and ended with the line, "If you persist in this behavior, I will be forced to report you to the Willow Homeowners Association." I folded the letter. No reply. Instead, I logged into the Kingsville County Court's online filing system, created case number L57-9821, and filed a civil suit alleging false report to authorities, public defamation resulting in reputational harm, unlawful physical contact, and racially charged speech in a public place. 2 weeks later, Kara hired a private attorney, Allister Finch, a tall, thin man with a side-parted haircut, wire-rimmed glasses, and a local reputation for saying a lot without ever saying much. People often compared him to cold porridge, seemingly respectable, but no one ever wanted a second serving. On Tuesday afternoon, Finch called me. "Can we settle this out of court, Beavis?" My client feels misunderstood. I replied, "A misunderstanding is when someone walks into the wrong yoga class. This was deliberate, repeated, and dangerous behavior." He chuckled awkwardly. "I could offer a small amount. Consider it. Goodwill?" "How much?" $1,000, and a letter of apology, but no admission of liability. I didn't need to think. Declined. This isn't about money. It's about a pattern of behavior, a repeated model, and I won't let it continue, no matter the amount. Myra, who was sitting on the sofa reading a textbook on compassion and elementary education, had overheard the entire call. She set the book down, walked over to me, and said softly, "I don't need to win big. I just need her to understand there are consequences." And that was why we didn't back down. We decided to move to the next step: formal deposition. 1 room, 1 attorney, 1 video recording, and 1 woman who, for the first time, would have to answer real questions, under oath, about the lies she told. On the day of the formal deposition, the room was just over 30 square meters, yet the tension was as thick as a Broadway stage. Cold, white fluorescent lights, a long wooden table, thinly padded chairs, no gavels, no jury, but every word was being recorded, both on video and audio, and could be used as evidence in court. Myra sat to my right, dressed simply yet elegantly, a navy blue blouse, a long skirt, and a small teardrop-shaped necklace, the gift I gave her on our 8th wedding anniversary. Her posture was upright, hands clasped together, her gaze calm like a lake in autumn. No need for anger, because the truth is the most powerful weapon. Sitting across from us was Ellie Cara Whitmore, still projecting her suburban lady look with softly curled hair and a puffed-sleeve blouse. But this time her eyes lacked confidence. Her hands clutched a beige leather purse tightly, as though she were holding together her cracking sense of pride. And between us, leading the deposition, was Mariah Espinosa, a young attorney who once interned under my mentorship. She entered the room composed, wearing a charcoal gray blazer, her hair tied low, carrying no files, just a single black Pilot V5 pen. "Mrs. Whitmore," Mariah began in a voice soft, yet sharp as a razor's edge. "You confirm that you called 911 on June 14th, correct?" "Yes." "Because you felt threatened?" "Exactly. Can you describe specifically the threatening behavior?" Kara took a deep breath. She was large, and the way she looked at me made me think I was about to be attacked. Maria didn't react. She nodded, then pulled from her pocket a copy of the 911 call recording, placed it on the table, and pressed play. "Send someone quickly! A large black woman is destroying my car." Maria paused the recording, then asked simply, "What was that woman doing when you made the call?" "She was just standing there," Kara answered, her voice softening. "Did she smash your car?" "No." "Did she shout in your face?" "No." "Did she touch you?" Kara licked her lips, eyes cast downward. "No." The air in the room fell still, as if someone had drained all the oxygen out. Maria continued, each question as precise as the strike of a judge's gavel. "You told police you were assaulted. Surveillance footage shows you approached and grabbed my client's wife's arm. What do you call that?" I was mistaken." You were mistaken when you touched someone without consent. No, I mean, I felt threatened at the time, so I reacted that way. Over the next 90 minutes, Kara oscillated between a helpless victim and a self-appointed guardian of proper conduct in upscale neighborhoods. She said things like, "We need civilized standards. We're not used to disruptive behavior." She was pumping gas, but too forcefully. I sensed something was off. I didn't interrupt. Each sentence Kara spoke only deepened the hole she was standing in. Sensing things were slipping, her lawyer Alistair Finch finally spoke up. "We acknowledge there may have been some misunderstandings, but no malicious intent. Perhaps we could resolve this with a modest settlement." "How much?" Maria asked. $2,500. No apology? No admission of fault. I shook my head. So did Maria. Finch frowned, hurriedly adjusted his tie, trying to stay composed. Then $5,000, still under the position that this was merely a misunderstanding. I looked at Maria. She didn't need to look back to know my answer. She stated clearly, every word deliberate. No apology. No admission of wrongdoing. No settlement. The deposition ended at 4:12 p.m., with a long silence from Kara. For the first time, she had nothing to say. But for us, the battle wasn't over. It had only entered its second act, one where the law was no longer an abstract idea, but a tool to halt a lifetime of hatred in its tracks. 1 week after the deposition, we received a summons for a pre-trial mediation hearing, a procedure often used when both parties seem unlikely to reach an agreement, but the court still wants to give them a final opportunity before moving the matter into the public record. The mediation took place at 9:30 a.m. on Wednesday in courtroom 4C of the Kingsville County Courthouse. No jury, no audience, just 4 people. Me, Maria, Attorney Finch, and Kara. Presiding over the session was Judge Gerald Vance, a white man in his 60s, with a weathered appearance and a gaze that seemed capable of slicing through paperwork to reach the core of the matter. He was well known in legal circles for his principle of zero tolerance for racial intimidation. He didn't mince words. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, resting a hand on the nearly 3-centimeter thick case file. "I've read the depositions, reviewed the footage, and listened to the 911 audio. And I'll say this plainly. If this were a criminal trial instead of a civil one, I would have signed a warrant for your arrest right now." No one spoke. Kara remained silent. Finch lowered his head. At that moment, for the first time since this case began, I saw a fracture in their composure. The superiority was gone. The rebuttals vanished. What remained was reluctant acceptance. We presented our final offer. Not inflated, not vindictive, but enough to reflect the seriousness of the offense. $50,000 in damages for defamation and emotional distress. A formal written apology, signed and notarized. A no-contact order lasting 24 months, enforceable within Willow Heights and any public space within a 2-mile radius of our residence. Finch asked for 5 minutes to consult with his client. Both left the room without a word. While waiting, Maria looked at me and asked, "Do you think they'll agree?" I replied, "After that deposition? They have no other option if they want to save face." They returned at 9:51 a.m. Finch entered first, followed by Kara, clutching her leather handbag tightly, lips pressed, face flushed. Finch sat down, straightened the documents, and said, "My client agrees to the terms. However, we request to be excused from the public reading of the admission." I glanced at Maria. We had anticipated this possibility. I nodded. "As long as the admission is handwritten, complete, signed, and notarized by a third party, we agree to waive the public reading." Judge Vance made a note, confirming in a level voice, "This will be the final agreement. The matter ends here. But let me warn you, Mrs. Whitmore, do not ever attempt behavior like this again. Not everyone is as patient as the Bellingham family, and not everyone survives racial defamation." The session ended. We exited the courtroom. No one said goodbye. 59 days later, on a Monday morning, $50,000 was deposited into our joint account via ACH transfer from the office of Finch and Associates. We sat down to allocate the funds. After a 28-minute conversation, we agreed. $5,000 would be used to create a scholarship fund at the elementary school where Myra teaches. $32,500 would be donated to the local racial justice organization, Fair Ground Initiative. The remainder would be kept to cover legal costs and fund pro bono support for others facing similar situations. A week later, we received the apology letter, a plain white envelope, no sender, no design. Inside was a single A4 sheet, simply printed, centered, Times New Roman, font size 12. I apologize for my actions that day. Ellie Whitmore. No title, no greeting, no handwritten signature, no emotion. But for us, it was the silence that followed that felt like the real reward. No more barking dogs at 5 a.m., no more anonymous letters to the neighborhood council, no more cold stares in the driveway. Just the sound of wind rustling through the maple tree outside our porch, and the wind chime Kara once called too strange a sound for a white neighborhood. 14 days after the final legal settlement, the neighborhood of Willow Heights woke up to a sight that surprised no one, yet everyone watched in silence. A red and white "For Sale" sign was posted right in front of the white-painted wooden fence at 314 Brookstone Lane. It was the house where Ellie, Kara Whitmore, had lived for 27 years. A woman who once called herself the all-seeing eye of the neighborhood, who hosted town watch meetings just to complain about the inappropriate color of the door at House 307, or Christmas music playing past 9 p.m. But that morning, there was no gathering, and no one came to say goodbye. No farewell muffins, no wreaths on the door, no polite neighborly laughter. Just the soft screech of suitcase wheels rolling over concrete, echoing in air so thin it felt like the sound itself was signing the final sentence on an era of dominance. Myra and I stood on the front porch. She held a cup of hot tea, the licorice-infused kind she made every Sunday morning. She said nothing, just watched, her eyes wide open but without anger or satisfaction. Only a breath of release. Cora emerged, still in her faded floral dress, pulling a suitcase. Duchess, the old, frail, trembling poodle, was gently placed in the back seat of a chipped sedan, with peeling paint on the front bumper. Cora didn't turn around. She didn't glance at the house. She didn't look at anyone on the street. The car door slammed shut like the lid of a coffin sealing the end of a decayed reign. The engine started at 9:17 a.m., and the car drove off Brookstone Lane, slowly passing each home. Homes she used to patrol every morning, noting who watered their lawn on time, who didn't bring in the garbage bin. Now she passed by, and not a single window opened. Not one gaze acknowledged her. Not one hand waved goodbye. And then, within just a week, everything changed. The maple tree in front of her old house, once withered from neglect, was now being cared for by the new homeowners. The rusted mailbox was replaced by a modern oak one with stainless steel handles. The house that had once symbolized control and fear had become a place where laughter began. The new family was a young couple. The husband, a white man, a philosophy professor at a community college. The wife, of Korean descent, worked for a nonprofit supporting immigrants. They had 2 young daughters, ages 5 and 7. with wide eyes and laughter like silver bells in summer. Every morning, the younger girl biked past our house, wearing a cat-shaped backpack, stopping at the porch and calling out, "H, Miss Myra!" And Myra, always, would smile, wave back, and call out, "Did you bring banana bread to school today?" Every Sunday, Myra baked banana cinnamon muffins, wrapped them in pale yellow tissue paper, placed them in a plastic container, and brought them over to the family as a wordless welcome. A simple act, but it rekindled the breath this neighborhood had long forgotten, kindness that doesn't need to be announced. I realized then, the so-called little kingdom that Cora tried to control had never truly existed. It only survived because people feared upsetting her, because everyone bowed to avoid conflict. But when someone stood up, not with anger, but with reason and the law, the throne she sat on for nearly 3 decades collapsed within weeks. What moved me most wasn't the money or winning the case. It was a peaceful evening, sitting on the porch reading, the wind brushing past the awning, and the sound of the wind chime, something Kara once complained about in a letter because it sounded like a festival of colored folks. Now, that chime rings gently, blending with the laughter of children, the spin of tiny bicycle wheels on the sidewalk, and the friendly bark of a dog in a neighbor's backyard. No fireworks, no declaration, just the quiet presence of a community that knows how to be kind, and knows when it's time to say, "That's enough." Sometimes, in the middle of a quiet morning or during a drowsy late-night moment, I find myself wondering, what would have happened if I hadn't happened to turn into that gas station that day? If I hadn't stepped out of the meeting just in time, hadn't seen Myra's car, hadn't gotten out of mine just as Kara was furious and falsely accusing her? If the security camera had glitched that day, or if Tyler, the young clerk, had called out sick? If the digital receipt had failed to send, or if Myra had simply forgotten her phone, would she have been arrested? Would the image of a black woman, hands cuffed, pressed against a patrol car in a parking lot, have become just another among thousands shared online, scrolled past with a frown, and then forgotten? I remember vividly the initial demeanor of the officers when they arrived. They didn't come to investigate. They came to react out of reflex. A call from a white, middle-aged woman, her voice panicked. They stepped out with hands hovering near their guns, eyes wary. Of my wife, the woman calmly standing there, still holding the fuel nozzle. I saw it in their eyes, not hatred, not malice, but a deep-seated invisible bias etched into the system. If I hadn't been there that day, hadn't held up my attorney's card, hadn't laid out every minute and second, would they have believed Myra? And if all evidence had been against her, who would have stood up for her? I think of the countless black men, women, and children who have been misunderstood, accused, detained, not because they were wrong, but because no one was there to say, "I saw what happened." We were lucky. We had the law. We had evidence. We had a voice. But thousands, tens of thousands, only have the truth. And sometimes, the truth isn't enough if no one is listening. That's why I'm telling this story. Not to rehash a confrontation at a gas station, not to publicly shame an aging racist, but as a wake-up call, for myself, for you, for all of us. A wake-up call that a seemingly harmless word can destroy an entire life. A wake-up call that one person's fear, if placed on the scales of justice without scrutiny, can crush an innocent soul. And a wake-up call that every civilized society only stands strong when some are willing to say, "No, I will not be silent." Because justice isn't something that arrives naturally. It must be demanded. It must be led. And it must be defended with action, with evidence, with courage. If you witness a Kara in your world, someone who manipulates emotion to protect privilege, someone who exploits fear to dodge accountability, don't look away. Don't tell yourself it's not a big deal. Don't whisper, "That's not my business." Because silence in that moment is the greatest accomplice to injustice. Myra once asked me, a day after it all ended, "Do you think this will keep happening?" I didn't answer right away. But today, if asked again, I would say, it will, if we let it. And that's why I recount it all, every detail, every second, every look. Because if it hadn't been that day, it would have been another. If it hadn't been Myra, it would have been someone you love. And if not you, who stands up? Then who? I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like the video and subscribe so you won't miss the next one.